Hello friends, welcome to C# Intermediate to Advanced tutorial. You are watching threading subseries 1.3. So in this video we will see how to start a thread. That means you will learn running a function on a separate thread. Previously we run the task of generating 16,000 random number in UI thread. Now we will separate that and run it on a different thread, or thread which is different from the UI thread. Alright. So first we learned about the basics of threads. Then we saw how a single threaded UI blocks the user interaction when some long running task is going on. So if you see the function task, that's a part of the UI thread. Work 1 is part of UI thread. Work 2 is also part of UI thread. So that's why work 1 ran first and work 2 waited for work 1 to complete. Work 1 in UI thread, work 2 is also on UI thread. So that's why when work 1 is going on, you can't, or I can say when work 1 is going on, we clicked the button 2 or 3 times, right? But the code for this handler is here and it doesn't run in between. The event happened long back, right? Not at this time. So if this is the timing diagram. So this is because work 1, work 2 both are in the same thread. So when the UI thread is busy executing this task, even though you click it 3 times, the code should execute for 3 times, and that doesn't happen. So it happened only after UI thread finished its first work 1, A. After executing A, B, or the piece of code for B, that ran. Alright, now we will separate this task into a thread or in its own thread. A thread class can start a task in a separate thread. Thread class expects a delegate called ThreadStart. So we already learned delegate in one of our video. So delegate tells it's a object for a function, we can say, or C+ people knows it as a function pointer. Some people will state a callback function. Likewise, it's a we can say it's a reference for a function, ThreadStart. So ThreadStart delegate represents a function which takes no param, returns void. So that's what the ThreadStart expects. So with the ThreadStart delegate, you can point any function, but that function should satisfy these 2 conditions. That means it should not take any parameter. I mean, the function should not take any parameter, and it should return a void. The method represented by the ThreadStart is a delegate, right? Will run in a separate thread and it is seen as a task. So ThreadStart, we will see the thread class when starting a thread expects a ThreadStart delegate. Using that ThreadStart delegate, we can tell the thread class that I want to run the specific function in a separate thread, right? So the method represented by the ThreadStart points to some method and that method will run in a separate thread. So it is seen as a task. Usually we can say it's a background task or some task that runs in a separate thread. One can initiate the task. Task means one can execute the function, initiate the task by calling start method of the thread. So thread class can start a task, right? So that's what here we are saying. One can instantiate the task by calling the start method. Thread class can start a task using the start method. You can read like it. So in the previous example, we created a method called task, right? We created a method called task that generates 16,000 random numbers and prints that in the debug output window. We also saw when that task of 16,000 printing happens, even though we click in between some button, that button click will not get responded by the UI thread, or because UI thread was busy generating the 16,000 random numbers, right? Now we will run it on its own thread. So in the previous example we created a task, and now we will run it on its own thread. Why? Because previously the task was part of the UI thread. Now we will separate that from the UI thread, and we will give the task its own thread. So there will be two threads. One is UI thread and another one is the task thread. And the task thread is for generating the 16,000 random numbers. So now we will go ahead. So previously we implemented generate random numbers. We also handled this to print some debug message. Now we will handle this, and this time the task will start as a thread. So to use thread, we need to include the namespace system.threading. Previously we imported system.diagnostics, right? That diagnostics is to use the debug print functionality. Now here we are using system.threading. Why? Because we need to start this task as a separate thread, right? So btn gen noneness, that's a spelling mistake, generate numbers threaded. So click event we are handling. If you see here, first we are creating the ThreadStart delegate. The ThreadStart delegate expects a function that returns nothing and it takes nothing. So our task is void and it doesn't take any parameter. And if you want to see, this is our task, right? It returns void and there is no parameter to it, and it generates a 16,000 random number. And this task is a candidate for ThreadStart. So we created a ThreadStart delegate and we are naming this as a thread task. Task function, we created a delegate. Next we are creating a thread T1, that's the reference name we are giving. New thread. For this new thread we are passing the ThreadStart instance which we created here, right? Thread task we are giving to thread, and thread task denotes the task. So that means thread is ready and this thread knows which function to invoke and run on a separate thread. So T1.start will make a call to this task and runs this on a separate thread. So this is the click of one. and here we will be having click of 2. So click of 1, if you see the task A and button click, let's state that was a B, right? So UI thread, previously UI thread is executing both the task. Both the task means it executes A and executes B. Both are part of the UI thread. Now what happens with this generate numbers T, there is a UI thread and we are creating this as T1, right? Let's state T1. And if you see, task A is part of separate thread and UI thread is free now, and the say hi is still part of UI thread. So now what happens, since it's a long running task, if it takes 20 seconds and when user performs any UI thread related action, it will not get disturbed because of this busy task, 20-second running task, we can say. Alright, now we will go ahead and experiment this. Now it's demo time. So this is where we left previously, right? We will clear this, we will minimize this as well. Now we will handle the generate btn generate numbers threaded, that requires system.threading, and in the thread button click handler we will start the task as a thread this time. So task, if you see, this is the task, and in the button click handler, previously in the button click handler we directly called the task, so we are not running the task in a separate thread. So as part of the UI thread, the UI thread executes this and it doesn't span any other thread, it executes the task. So the task is part of UI thread. But here if you see the button click, the second button click, this button click, so that is still part of UI thread only, but this UI thread here creates ThreadStart, creates thread and T1.start. So that means UI thread is spanning one more thread T1, and T1 is now executing the task in a separate thread, or this is T1 thread and remaining piece of code is in UI thread, right? Now we will build this and we will run. We click clear here. I will click generate random numbers. We know that, okay, this time we will give generate random numbers here. We will click generate random numbers threaded way. Then we will click the say hi button 3 times. So I'm clicking generate random numbers. Click it 3 times. And if you see here, we are seeing task ends, and let us search for this. And if you see, the count is sequential, that's how we printed it here. Count, loop counter, then random number, count 0, number. So after this column we will be seeing the random number. Here it is a sequential number. Now we will search for, I'm pressing Ctrl F, Ctrl V, find next. And if you see, the message is coming in between, because these messages are printed by T1 and this is accessed by the UI thread. And if you see, all these messages are happening in between, right? We can also experiment this with a more meaningful way. Clear all. Now what I'm going to do, I will click generate random numbers. You will see the number generation will go here, and I will try to move this. See, number generation is going on, and here I am constantly moving my window, right? So UI is responding, actually maximizing it. Everything is working, right? Resizing it. All right, that's all. Thank you for watching. Bye.